Hmm. Trying to fix my scarf here. All right, Assalamu alaikum, people. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to our live podcast. So, I thought that I would make a quick introduction. This part will probably be cut out later, but so I have been threatening you to make a podcast for about a year now. We are finally to the point of making a podcast, but I thought that I'd do my podcast a little bit different, right? So my platforms are Instagram and Facebook. That is where I teach. That is where I motivate. That's where I share information and education. And so I want my podcast to be an addition to that for people who will not necessarily log on social media, but rather a podcast platform. So each one of my lives, we are going to do here every Thursday at 1 p.m. We are going to record conversations and information, and then it will be transferred into a podcast for your listening pleasure and sharing later on. So I want to make sure that you are aware starting on Monday, the 10th, you will find the Fit Muslima podcast on all places that you will enjoy podcast listening. I have recorded the first 3 episodes to give you a little glimpse into my background, why I do what I do, what motivates me, and what gives me inspiration to continue to share. So today, we are actually going to jump into a discussion, hopefully, on exactly what happens to the body step by step as we fast, right? When we're doing wet fasting, when we're doing dry fasting. So if you have about, I don't know, 40 minutes or so to hang out with me, we're going to record a podcast, all right? So let me pull up my script here of how I need to do my intro. Obviously, my team is going to cut this part out. It is literally our live recording of the podcast. So today, my dears, we are talking about fasting. Y'all ready to get started? Let's do a podcast, y'all. Okay. You're listening to the Fit Muslima podcast, where we discuss the interconnection between food, faith, and fitness. I'm your host, Mubaraka Ibrahim. This podcast, my social media presence, and my weekly newsletter all focus on the philosophy that physical, mental, and spiritual well being is intertwined. The weakness of one weakens them all, and the strengthening of one strengthens them all. Welcome to the show. So, today's podcast, we are going to talk about a very popular topic of intermittent fasting, what it is, how it relates to dry fasting that Muslims do in Ramadan, and what actually happens to the body on a physiological level. Because I feel that when I hear people talking about intermittent fasting, they really talk about the surface of it. And I mean sort of like as we talk about, hey, I'm intermittent fasting and I'm going to use this as a technique to lose weight, or I'm going to use this as a technique to do this, or I'm just fasting because it is the time that in my religion, be it Ramadan or lit during in a Christian faith, or when the Jewish faith fast, that it's based on sort of a spiritual obligation. So why do we fast, and how does it change our metabolism, our gut, our brain? There's so many benefits of fasting. So, as we get into the topic for today's podcast, I want you to think about, we are talking about the internal mechanisms that going without food actually helps to correct or not, and how it actually affects us on a biological level, like what's happening inside of our body. I'm not going to use today's podcast to dive into any spiritual aspects of fasting or any sort of this is what you need to do in order to fast, right? We can get into that at a different time. But today I really wanted people to understand sort of the physical changes that fasting can make inside of your body. When we talk about fasting, let's first define terms. So, the first term that we want to define is what is fasting, right? Because as we mentioned earlier, that people fast for different reasons, um, depending on their spirit, their religion, depending on what they're trying to achieve, depending on their level of knowledge of what they need to do in terms of fasting. So, let's define the term, and that way we are speaking the same language. So, first, if you are going to fast, that means that you are restricting food consumption, right? So, in the research around fasting, it is often referred to as time restricted eating, right? TRE, or intermittent fasting. Time restricted eating, obviously, for exactly the reason that the term says you restrict your eating to a certain time. So, intermittent fasting is an overarching term that covers different types of time restricted eating. For the layperson that may be fasting for health reasons, it's often referred to as intermittent fasting. When we look at research and when they research intermittent fasting, this is referred to as a wet fast. A wet fast is when you restrict the consumption of food, but you do allow yourself water, black coffee, green tea. Those are sort of the three base level of things that you can consume that's liquid that will not give you an insulin response. So that's a really important thing for us to understand to define exactly how we receive health benefits from fasting. Anytime we consume anything that causes an insulin response, our digestive system to activate, it sort of pauses the health benefits of what happens when we're fasting. When we talk about fasting in a terms of dry fasting, that is what Muslims do during the month of Ramadan. So I am recording this podcast on the 15th day of Ramadan, I think. And Muslims throughout the entire world are doing dry fasting every day from sunrise to sunset. Dry fasting is defined by not consuming food or any liquids during a specific amount of time, right? During those time restricted hours. Now, how do we sort of define how long a person should fast or needs to fast in order for it to be considered sort of the benefits of the fast? Well, when we are looking at, and again, we're talking purely from a physical aspect, we're talking purely from sort of like what is the science and research telling us that happens in the body after a certain amount of hours. In order for many of the benefits of time restricted eating to begin, you have to have a minimum of 12 hours. So that sort of answers that question, right? Can I fast for 8 hours and still get these benefits? Can I fast for 10 hours and still get these benefits? The research is telling us it's 12 hours. Why 12 hours? Because the benefits happen, they sort of like kick in, that switch that turns on happens when our liver depletes itself of glycogen. And for most people, that takes about 12 hours. Now, for some people, particularly people with a high level of insulin resistance. So, an example of that would be someone who maybe has type 2 diabetes and they are on insulin 5 times a day, right? They have a high level of insulin resistance. It can take up to 18 hours, according to the research, for the liver to deplete itself of glycogen. It actually takes longer for somebody with insulin resistance to deplete the liver of glycogen. Why the liver needs to be depleted of glycogen, right? So let's again sort of define these terms: glucose and glycogen, right? When we eat, anytime you eat carbohydrates, and that can be in the term of carbohydrates as a macronutrient. I'm not talking about just rice or just pasta. I'm talking about carbohydrates as a macronutrient. We know that everything except for animal protein has carbohydrates in it. So, your apple has carbohydrates, your collard green has carbohydrates, your squash has carbohydrates, of course, the rice, the pasta, the candy bar, everything has some component of carbohydrate with the exception of animal protein. So, steak, zero carbs. Um, Eggs, zero carbs. Lamb, zero carbs. Shrimp, fish, zero carbs. All right. So, when you consume carbohydrates, say I decided to have some mixed vegetables, small amount of carbs, but still carbs. Say I decided to have some rice with that, much more amount of carbs, but still carbohydrates. Even if it is a whole grain, such as brown rice or whole wheat pasta, it's still carbohydrates. It comes into your body. Your body then converts those consumed carbohydrates into glucose, right? I want you to follow sort of the pathway that this takes in your body, right? Your body consumes it, turns it into glucose. The glucose then circulates in your bloodstream. So that is the first place that you're going to find glucose. For anybody who's ever had a fasting glucose test, if you are insulin resistant and you take your blood glucose, you already know this because what do? You prick your finger, you get a little bit of blood, you put it on a little stick, and you stick it in the machine. The machine is literally testing the glucose inside of your blood. Now, the way the body should work is we consume carbohydrates, it flows through the blood. When we exercise, wash dishes, breathe, right? All of those things take energy, and our body converts those carbohydrates into energy to be used by the body. If we have excess carbohydrates, our body is then going to first store it inside of the liver. In order for it to be stored, it has to be converted into glycogen, right? So when we use the term glucose and we use the term glycogen, they are essentially on the base level the same thing. Glycogen is stored glucose. So if your body is using it, if it's in the bloodstream, then it's glucose. Once your body stores it, so think of it sort of like when we store leftover food. For example, you make too much food, I can eat this later. The body says, I can use this later. We put it in a Tupperware container. Now it's no longer dinner, it's leftovers, right? Very easy analogy. So our body takes the glucose, puts it in a storage container, and now it's no longer glucose, it's glycogen. Glycogen is stored in the liver, but the liver only has a finite capacity. Once the liver is filled, now our body is going to store glycogen inside of our muscles, right? So glucose is converted into glycogen, and glycogen is stored in three places in the body. First, it's stored in your liver, then it's stored in your muscles, and but both of those are finite, right? Once the liver is full to capacity, it says, I can't store any more glycogen. Now it's going to store glycogen inside of your muscles. Once your muscles are full to capacity, it says, I can't store any more glycogen. Now your body will store it as excess fat, right? So your fat is literally stored glycogen, right? Stored energy. Now, the dilemma with this sort of mechanism of where we store our glycogen is that fat is not finite. There is no known human capacity of how much excess fat we can store. That's why we have shows like My 600-Pound Life, or we have people who literally weigh a ton, right? There's no end to our body saying, I cannot store more fat. Now, the health issues that come along with storing too much fat obviously gives us limitations, but the capacity for our body to store fat, there's no known human capacity for the amount of fat that can be stored. Or in another term, the amount of glycogen that can be stored. Okay, so now we sort of have this pathway in our head, right? Now you know exactly what happens to the excess carbohydrates that you are eating. In order for us to convert sort of, or I should say, let me rephrase. In order for us to flip that switch to allow our body to have benefits from the fast, we have to first deplete the liver of glycogen. Because once the liver is completed of glycogen, it is almost like a switch happens in the body, right? So, what happens to us exactly when our liver depletes of glycogen, right? How are we going to get energy? Because gotta be honest, it's really challenging for your body to get energy from your muscles if you are not moving. So, the way that we get glycogen out of our muscles is we move the muscles. Because remember, glycogen is glucose, glucose is energy, right? The way that we get glycogen out of our fat is we need to move. So, our body will need to reach into the fat and pull the stored energy back into our system to use. But one of the first things that happens before our body does that is it thinks I need, so sort of follow me as sort of a conversation. So one of the things, I'm going to just say this real quick. If you are just getting to know me, you will find that I use lots of metaphors and analogies. So as we take this journey together, you're going to have to bear with me. I find that it's just much easier for people to understand and easier for me to explain when I use metaphors and analogy. So when I talk about a conversation that your body is having, right? Of course, your liver is not physically talking, obviously, but it is a conversation of the exchange that happens in your body on a biological level, right? So now that I now that we have used all of the blood glucose, so we've gone 12 hours fasting, right? And let me say this, I'm going to back up a little bit, sort of like to explain this in a better way. I should say in a sequential way. So we have our last meal, whatever that is, right? Iftar or dinner the night before, if you overslept for your morning meal, right? We're talking in Ramadan. Or you have your morning meal, your sahur in the morning, it's your last meal. Depending on sort of like what that meal is, whether it's protein, whether it's carbohydrates, it will dictate how long your body has immediate access to glucose. Remember that energy that we talked about? It will dictate how long that immediate energy before your body has to go reaching for glycogen in other places, right? This is actually also going to be determined by your metabolic flexibility. So that's a term, and a term that we'll hear again, or you'll hear again that I use. So your metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to be able to switch between using glucose and using ketones. All right, so now we're going to introduce the concept of ketones. So you go several hours without eating. If you've had carbohydrates for breakfast, sort of you've had some oatmeal or you've had some rice, sometimes you eat leftovers for dinner, or you've had, a fruit smoothie in the morning. Fruit digests, and that energy, right, in the form of glucose, is going to be available to you for about 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes. It's actually digested very quickly, right? Even if you are having fruit that has fiber. So you ate the whole apple, not apple juice, right? You're still only going to have about 45 minutes of available glucose for your body to tap into. Or if you decided to say have oats, and it's the steel cut Irish oats made from scratch, your body is going to have access to about 2 hours of available glucose. That's like sort of like what's coming in, and your body can like tap into it from your bloodstream and use it for energy output. If you have protein, so an egg or a piece of steak, I don't know, maybe you're having steak and eggs for breakfast, right? Before you start your fast. Your body is going to have access to about 4 hours of energy because protein has a longer digestive period, which means it's sort of a slow drip energy source for your body, right? Now, your food is completely digested. Say you are 6 hours into your fast. Now your food is digested. We're going to go 12 hours into your fast. Not only is your food completely digested, but your body has used all its immediate energy from the glucose from your food that you've eaten, and it has begun to tap into and use all of your stored glycogen in your liver, right? So you would say, well, if all of my food is only going to give me 4 hours max of energy, where is that extra energy coming from for me to finish my day out? It's coming from the stored glycogen, right? As soon as your bloodstream no longer have glucose, body is like, aha, I got some leftovers in the refrigerator. Let me go grab them, right? So now it goes to the liver. But the problem, or I shouldn't say it's not a problem, the process of getting glycogen from the liver is it takes about 12 hours. So now you've used all of your glycogen from your liver. You've eaten your food in the morning, you've gone through the digestive period, you've used all of your available glucose. Now you've tapped in and used all of your available glycogen in the liver. So what happens? So before your body actually goes to grab sort of excess fat, right? It does that slightly, but its first and immediate need is I need energy right now, right? Because it's kind of difficult to convert all of the stored glycogen in the fat cells back into energy, right? That's an extra process for the body. If you've ever tried to lose weight, you understand that that is a process. It's not that easy. So, what your body does is say, okay, where can I get some glycogen or some energy from? The second place in which our body derives energy is from fat converted into ketones. So now the body says, I need to find fat, convert that into ketones because I can use that for energy. Now, where does it get the fat from? It can get it from two places: consumed fat or stored fat. It literally can tap into, which is much easier for the body, right? When it is depleted of glycogen, it is easier for the body to tap into stored fat and convert it into ketones for energy, right? So, this is the literal definition of what happens when a person attempts to be on a ketogenic diet, right? Now you can understand the term. The goal for a person who is on a ketogenic diet, which we will not get into today, we will get into it, but not today, is to get the body to burn fat converted into ketones and use ketones as energy instead of glucose and glycogen. That is the goal. The important thing, I'm going to just put a little side note for our future conversations, is that this does not happen in the presence of a carbohydrate or glucose supply. So you can't sort of, I should say, and let me say, without supplementation. There's supplementation available. So you can't sort of like, I'm going to sort of eat carbohydrates today and then not eat them tomorrow and be on a ketogenic diet and switch every other day, because it doesn't work that way, right? You have to really be without glucose in order for your body to depend on ketones for energy. So now we're 12 hours in, right? So we're 12 hours into our fast, and our body has begun, you're not in ketosis, right? Has begun the ketosis process, right? Because the process begins when your body starts to convert fat into ketones. All right. So that's 12 hours in. So let's fast forward now. So now your body is okay. I'm using a different source of energy. This is the conversation that's happening in your body. We're going to go forward to the 16-hour mark, right? 16-hour mark is what is most common referred to when people talk about intermittent fasting, right? I'm doing 16-8. The interesting thing about this particular breakdown is that it isn't chosen for any particular special reason. It was actually simply the limitations of the researchers who did some of the initial research on intermittent fasting. And it turned out to be sort of the most practical way for most people to be able to do time restricted eating, because most people don't mind skipping one meal a day, right? Generally, it's breakfast. It can certainly be dinner, depending on your schedule, but 16-8. So now at the 16-hour window, what is happening inside of our body? So at the 16-hour window, now your insulin level, so 12-hour window, insulin level begins to drop. 16-hour window, insulin level sort of has found its stabilization area. And this is super important because your insulin is a domino hormone. you're going to hear me throughout many of the episodes talk about insulin as a domino hormone. The amount of research around the reactions and actions simply based on the rise and fall of insulin when it comes to disease, when it comes to health, when it comes to exercise, when it comes to energy, when it comes to muscle growth, when it comes to speed and endurance. All of those have the same linchpin. What is your insulin level doing at that time? It is going to be a huge determiner on the outcome of the activity or the meal that you're eating. Insulin is a domino hormone because one of its first functions is it is a fat storage hormone. So, what that means is when your insulin level rises, it signals your body to store fat. When your insulin level lowers, it signals your body to burn fat, right? So, that's one really important aspect of insulin. Insulin is also an inflammatory hormone. And I want to sort of underline, if I can uh, sort of like air quotes, air underline, the concept that insulin is a hormone. It is not something that only diabetics have, or there has to be something wrong with you if you have insulin. Insulin is a necessary hormone for human function and life. Everyone has an insulin hormone. Whether it functions properly or not is really the biggest issue that we have. So, besides insulin being a fat storage hormone, how does that affect us, right? It being a fat storage hormone. We can are in your mind, I know you're already sort of like the wheels are turning or how of how that affects you in terms of weight loss. But one of the ways that I think that people actually aren't aware that happens when we say fat storage is insulin as a hormone prevents your body from breaking down fat. That doesn't just mean excess body fat. It also means it prevents it from breaking down cholesterol. So, when a person has high cholesterol, very often it is more due to a high insulin level due to high consumption of carbohydrates. And you can literally decrease your cholesterol levels by giving your body more time to lower your insulin level so that the body can break down the lipids, right? So when insulin level is high, you consume fat, right? Or you consume cholesterol. The body should have the natural ability to literally be able to break down that cholesterol. But one of the issues that we have, that many people have, is they eat carbohydrates so often and they eat so often that the body never has an opportunity to lower insulin level enough to trigger the ability to break down the lipids in the system. So instead, it's storing the cholesterol. So that's one effect. Another effect that insulin has is it is a pro inflammatory hormone. That's not a bad thing because inflammation actually helps us to heal when it is appropriate, right? So when we think of inflammation, I want you to think of it sort of like in a way that we're most commonly see it, right? You bang your finger, you cut your finger, it swells up, you have inflammation in that area. The inflammation is not just, because you're injured. Your body is literally sending white blood cells there and it's inflaming it to bring more healing to that area. This is one of the reasons why when someone is sick, when someone is injured, they will actually have higher insulin levels, right? If you have prediabetes or diabetes, or you struggle to manage your insulin level or blood glucose, you probably already know this, right? If you get sick, your doctor may tell you to monitor your blood glucose much closer or may change the amount of medication that you're on because insulin is because the inflammation and the insulin sort of works hand in hand. When insulin level lowers, remember I told you that switch that happens? The switch of glycogen being depleted of the glucose of the liver and your insulin level lowering, that switch happens and it decreases inflammation. So one of the things that we commonly hear as Muslims is during Ramadan, people say, I'm fasting and my knees feel better. I don't have as many aches and pains. Alhamdulillah, right? Praise be to God, right? It's just beautiful the way that in Ramadan and fasting that the interconnection of the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being and health happens with fasting, right? One of the reasons why this happens is because inflammation lowers. Now, we know inflammation lowers. This is not just in our heads because research have been done literally testing inflammation markers in the body during a fast. And they see inflammation markers decreasing. So we know that it decreases as um, a factual change that happens inside of the body. And here is a teeter-totter, right? So insulin is a domino hormone. Not only does it create certain effects, it also plays off of other hormones. HGH, human growth hormone. It is like a teeter-totter with insulin. When insulin lowers, HGH rises. When insulin rises, HGH lowers. HGH does many of the opposite things as insulin. So, HGH actually is your key fat burning hormone, right? So insulin doesn't just lower and then everything just chaotically burns fat, right? It actually works with and in sync with the HGH hormone. HGH rises, stimulating fat burn, right? The literal breakdown of fat cells. All right. So that is one effect of HGH. Another effect of human growth hormone is it is an anti-inflammatory, right? Opposite of insulin, inflammatory, anti-inflammatory. So this happens somewhere around the 18 or 20-hour mark, right? We're going to go through sort of a 24-hour window of fasting. And then I'm going to take you back and talk about research around fasting in Ramadan and how consistent fasting over the month and what it triggers inside of the body. Because there's two ways in which we see, according to the research, these physiological changes in fasting. There is extended fast and sort of watching what happens to the body hour by hour over a 24 and 36 and 72-hour period. And then there is the cumulative benefits of fasting, which happens during the month of Ramadan. So in our extended fast, right, we're still in sort of that sort of function of it. At about hour 18 or 20, that is when we see, okay, insulin level is low, HGH has risen. So now the body is beginning to burn fat. The interesting thing about fat burn in particular, right? So I want to sort of give an overarching view of health, but I know we're going to talk about weight loss, but we're not just going to talk about weight loss. We're going to talk about health. a lot of people who want to lose weight and use intermittent fasting as a means of losing weight, right? They say, I'm going to do the 16-8, right? And I'm going to do great. And it is beneficial for many people, right? For a couple of reasons. Number one, it's going to balance hormones, it's going to lower insulin, it's going to allow your body to have more time to heal itself. So lots of benefits from the 18, for the 16-8 window. But the second way in which people can use fasting as a benefit for weight loss is a longer fast, right? So the research actually shows that there's sort of a sweet spot of lipolysis. Lipolysis is the break open. Think of sort of like fat cells as an egg, and you have to break it open in order to release the fat and then use it, right? Meaning the movement of it, right? Or using it as energy. The breakdown, right? The rate in which your body will break down fat actually increases between between hours 18 and 24. There's sort of a sweet spot there. So if a couple of days a week, not every day, you can do a 20-hour fast or a 24-hour fast, it can be more beneficial in terms of weight loss because lipolysis or fat burn, it sort of has a small upward trajectory as we fast 12 hours, 16 hours, 18 hours. And the research shows that when it hits that 18-hour, it sort of spikes for 18, 20, 24, and then it begins to level off again, right? So I just want to forewarn, this is not the more the better. There's just this specific little window there that you can get an extra spike of fat burn. So since we are doing a podcast and we are about halfway through, I want to remind you that this podcast is actually sponsored by Beta Health. It is a brand of vegan and halal supplements to help you to improve your health and well-being. You can visit getbettahealth.com. That's get, BETTA, health.com, and enter the code podcast to get 10% off of your order. Let's talk a little bit specifically about what happens with our mental focus, our brain, our memory when we're fasting. So, when we are in an extended fast at about hour 24, BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor, increases and increases significantly. One of the one of the benefits of BDNF, right? There is a book, one of my favorite books, right? It is called The Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain. I really love this book because, I'm sort of like a research enthusiast, and I love how John Ratey, he really focuses on sort of practical applications of how BDNF improves the brain. It's not a book about fasting. I have to give you that. It's just a very, very fascinating book if you're thinking about brain health and helping if you have a kid or you may have ADHD or memory issues. It's a great book all about the brain and how BDNF helps it. Well, one of the things that we know, so now that we know BDNF is so beneficial, in this book, Mr. Ratey refers to BDNF as a miracle grow for the brain, right? What does BDNF do first? So BDNF actually helps with the formation of new neurons in the brains. It helps with the development of synapses, right? Neurons that fire together, create connections between them. It improves memory and learning and mental focus. Well, intermittent fasting and fasting in the month of Ramadan have both been shown to significantly increase BDNF. This is absolutely amazing because it happens both with extended fasts. Remember those fasts that go 24 and beyond hours, but it's also happens specifically during the month of Ramadan. So, one research study looked at 29 participants. 22 of them were women, 9 of them were men, and they tested their brain for BDNF as well as dopamine. And the tests were done 2 days before Ramadan started, 14 days into Ramadan, and 29 days into Ramadan. The participants were fasting about 14 or 15 hours a day. And when they looked at how the brain actually changed in terms of how much BDNF or dopamine, they did not find a difference or statistically significant difference in dopamine levels throughout the month. But they did find that continuous fasting in the month of Ramadan increase significantly the amount of BDNF in the brain, showing that it improves memory, it improves cognition, it improves the way that your brain functions, right? BDNF does a lot of things for us. One of and this was just one study. There's actually several studies, which I can link to in the show notes. We'll link them into the show notes on YouTube and in the podcast that shows that fasting the month of Ramadan compared to before Ramadan, BDNF increased significantly by day 14. I think we're on day 15, so our brains should be hopping right now. And then even more by day 29. So, the benefits of fasting, we've gone through sort of like this hour by hour change that happens in the body. However, when you are fasting, as Muslims fast during the month of Ramadan, the cumulative effect of just 14 or 16 hours every day makes a significant difference, right? Before we go into sort of the details of fasting Ramadan and the cumulative effect, I want to sort of put a stake in the ground of the difference between wet fasting and dry fasting and some of the physiological differences that happens in the body. When we are wet fasting, and again, as we mentioned earlier, when we are drinking water or black coffee or green tea, our body has all of these benefits that we talked about, right? But when we are dry fasting, the research shows that all of this increases, right? So, one of the things that we know that happens when we are dry fasting, let's just take one, right? One thing from the research, autophagy, right? We haven't even got into autophagy yet. Autophagy, or some people pronounces it autophagy. I'm going to pronounce it autophagy. Autophagy is literally cellular detoxification and repair. That means that your body on a cellular level is detoxifying and repairing itself, right? When you say, I want to detox, you cannot get a more physical and literal detoxification than allowing your body to go into autophagy. When you experience autophagy, one of the things that happen, or several things that happen, is think of, again, here's my analogy, right? Your cells, the little circular things that we saw through the telescopes in high school, as they begin to age or get damaged, think of them as very literally getting damaged and age. aging, right? They get a little split in them or a little chip becomes missing, right? And those cells aren't quite able to do everything that they were when they were young, round, complete, sprite little cells, right? When autophagy kicks in, think of you have all of these little workers that's now going to come and they are going to do some spring cleaning. They're going to look at all of the cells and they're going to say, this cell cannot be repaired. Got too many pieces missing, too many cracks, and your body discards of it, right? Then they come across another cell and say, hmm, this cell has one piece missing. And then they take part of maybe the discarded cell or another cell that may have a couple of pieces missing, and it literally repairs it if it needs to. And then it realizes, wow, we've had several cells that we've had to throw away. So let us now regenerate more cells. So your body is actually going through this amazing process. Like it really is. I love the human body. You will find me like I love the human body. It's just such a beautifully made machine. Like nobody could have made this machine with the human body except for God. So it does all of these amazing things. It literally repairs, right? So this is also one of the keys to how they talk about fasting as a key to longevity, as a key to helping people live longer, right? It is definitely a part of the hypothesis based on mice, right? That mice who fast, their cells regenerate and it extended their life, right? As human beings, we probably won't know if somebody's fasting and they live to be 200 because the people tracking it probably won't live to be 200. Right? So it'd be a little bit more difficult. But we do know for human beings that intermittent fasting, that extended fasting can actually help to lengthen telomeres. So think not so I'm using these terms, but because of time today, we can't go in sort of like the details. So I'm going to use metaphors. So think of sort of like telomeres or like these strings inside of your body. And as we get older, they sort of get shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So scientists can literally, that's how they can look at inside of a body and say, this person died when they were 36, when they were 55, right? When you are doing intermittent fasting and when you are doing extended fasting, both. So consistent, remember there's a cumulative effect of intermittent fasting and extended fasting periodically. The telomeres literally lengthens. So if you've ever heard of sort of like people who talk about biohacking and longevity, and they are saying, well, internally, I am no longer 46, I am now 36, right? What are they basing that on? Well, most of them, if they have gotten the proper tests, they're actually basing it on the length of their telomeres. They're doing this or taking this supplement or engaging in this thing and actually watching test by test the telomeres increasing. We know that that is an indication of health, vitality, and longevity. So intermittent fasting, particularly, right? Particularly this one study about 3-day fasting has been shown to increase the length of telomeres. The last thing that I want to talk about, sort of as we talk about the benefits of intermittent fasting, is the benefits of the cumulative effects of intermittent fasting, right? Meaning not just doing it during Ramadan, not just doing it when sort of you're obligated to do it, but incorporating it into a lifestyle. And we know that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, he didn't just fast in Ramadan. He fasted throughout the year. In research today, the science looks at different ways in which people can get the benefits of fasting, right? And the science actually is mimicking the sunnah, right? One of the beneficial ways of fasting is 2 non-consecutive days, right? There's actually research around this. In Islam, we know that one of the sunnahs or the practices of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings